The Steelers have a tough task facing the Buffalo Bills that everyone see as a Super Bowl favorite, but it's Kenny Pickett's first start. How do they make things easier on him? What concepts they might want to call? We'll talk about that in the first segment. Then also, with all the injuries in the banged up secondary, who could be available and how will the Steelers adjust to it with a high-flying passing offense of Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs? And then finally, our predictions. I'm Chris Carter here on the North Shore Drive podcast, joined by Brian Batko. We are both of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It's going to be a fun Friday episode here. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. And welcome to the North Shore Drive Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Remember, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, but especially on YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button to get our YouTube channel right in your YouTube page every single day. This show is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but we have lots of content coming out daily, including a Pitt mailbag and other shows that are still rolling out every week. Again, I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. We're talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers today. All Steelers in this show. Brian, we got to talk about Kenny Pickett. He's making his first start. He thinks that they're not underdogs, even though they're 14-point underdogs, and like anyone with eyes says they're underdogs. I saw Von Miller was like, no one thinks you're underdogs. I'm like, Von, everyone thinks they're underdogs, and that's why he said that. But how have you seen Kenny Pickett's week gone? He wasn't practicing with the first team, for any parts of the season, and now all of a sudden he's thrust up in there. What has been how he's taken those reps, how he's responded to it, and how his teammates have responded to him to getting that role?
I think it's been steady for Pickett. You know, that's the kind of guy that they thought they were getting when they drafted him, and he even said that on Wednesday when we talked to him after practice. You know, he's a guy who never wants to get too high, never wants to get too low. And that's the same Kenny Pickett that I remember sitting down with in 2018 before his sophomore year at Pitt when I was covering the Panthers for the Post-Gazette, and he was getting set to be their quarterback of the future. So he hasn't changed a lot over the last 4 years. Talked to a former teammate the other day who said he's obviously more mature now than he was at Pitt, but this is kind of always who he's been, a guy who's ahead of his time, sort of savvy beyond his years. And, that's probably a big reason why he was able to step in at halftime and be not just functional, but, looking pretty sharp here and there against the Jets. Obviously the three, I'm not going to say 3 interceptions. That's just stupid. And that's just, being kind of tied to the box score. We all know it was really 2 interceptions because what are you going to do when you throw a Hail Mary, right? So let's just say, the 2 interceptions, not ideal, but neither one was a horrible play. I would say Mitch Trubisky's first pick to Deontay Johnson, even though it hit Johnson in the hands, it was tipped at the line by, I think, Sheldon Rankin. So that might have been, a worse mistake than any of the ones Pickett made. So he was able to get in there despite having no first team reps since camp in the preseason, kind of pick up where he left off with a lot of those guys and talk to Chase Claypool, talk to a couple linemen this week. They all are pretty confident, it seems. Nobody dished out the old Alan Faneca quote about Ben Roethlisberger. You think I'm excited to go play with some little rookie? They all seem excited to go play with Kenny Pickett.
I think that's a big part of this is that excitement period and making sure and finding a way to get that. But I also wanted to talk about how they need to use him in this game, because it's not as simple as just roll him out there, because this offense doesn't have an identity. It's not like he's taking over with Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, and a top 5 offensive line. They're still figuring out who they are. Their playmakers are still figuring out who they are. And that's not an easy position to throw a rookie into, which I do think is part of why they have been they didn't just throw him in there in the first place, because they wanted to kind of build an offense that he could kind of fit into. But there's got to be ways that they can call up plays that they can make things easier for Kenny Pickett. And not to say that everything's going to be easy for him, but not put him in a position where he has to throw 50 times in this game and is really tasking himself, because he looks NFL ready. Last week he looked like he understood what was going on. He looked more focused and more, game, anticipatory of what the Jets defense was doing than Mitch Trubisky did. But you don't want to press that too hard. You don't want to just be like, all right, yeah, he's good to go. Let's just hurl the ball around. You got to find a way to balance that. And a big part of that, I think, comes with the run game and playing off the run game with play action. It was a small sample size. It was just a half of football. But last week when he played, 37.5% of his play snaps or dropbacks, were play action passes or were off of play action passes. And out of the 6 plays that he did that, he threw 4 times, completed 3 of them, got 3 first downs, also scrambled twice. So he looked decent out of it. He understood where he was going from it, and I think that could be a way to do it. And also play action that includes the RPO, which works for him. Granted, the Steelers' offensive line keeps getting called for illegal man downfield, but those type of things I think can help isolate defenders in certain parts of the field. And Kenny Pickett, at least in the small sample size we've seen, seems to be able to identify where those isolated players are.
For sure. But even more so than the concept specifically, Chris, I'm curious just to see what the overall game plan and approach is by not just Matt Canada, but I mean, this is something that's going to have to go above him even more this week with Mike Tomlin.
Yeah.
How do you want to treat Kenny Pickett in his first NFL start? Do you want to try to take the air out of the ball, make him a game manager, kind of like the early days of Ben Roethlisberger, but like you said, maybe with a much better team overall around him back then? As much as it would be nice to do that for any rookie, let alone one making his first start, I just don't know that the Steelers have the ability to do that, to win the game on the ground, to run the football consistently and sustain drives. If they could, they probably would have done that already in the first 4 weeks, and that has eluded them. There have been flashes here and there, especially against the Browns, saw a little bit more against the Jets when they got Najee Harris going, but it hasn't been enough to be a consistent mode for them to rely on. So with all that being said, I do think there needs to be some level of letting Kenny Pickett go out there and kind of play free, play with a fearlessness that he had early on in his days, even going back to Pitt. So the play action stuff is certainly nice. I think he's very capable of it. You take the inherent risk of a young guy turning his back to the defense, and you don't want to get him lit up in that way against the Bills front that is pretty nasty. So there are pros and cons to all of those ideas, as you know, and as all of our smart listeners know. So I won't necessarily get down on Matt Canada if he has him in shotgun a lot and he's letting him just kind of survey the field and try to get rid of the ball quickly, or maybe take some of those deep shots that worked at times against the Jets or didn't work in the case of the Chase Claypool interception. But it really is fascinating when you talk about what is this game plan going to be for Pickett? What is he going to be able to do? What are they going to be comfortable letting him do up there in Buffalo against the defense that's allowing the second fewest points per game right now?
Just a reminder, we are also sponsored by the Acrisure Fan Advantage, the power to project one of our Post-Gazette Steelers beat writers into your home or office. By using augmented reality, you can get exclusive pregame breakdowns from a Steelers expert standing right in your living room. Get the latest insights, starting lineups, key matchups, and critical stats at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage. No apps or downloads, just insiders to the Steelers updates at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage, and get a real edge on this week's action. Brian and I have both done that once now. We're going to be back with you very soon on those. But again, on Kenny Pickett, I feel you. It's a serious question, and it's one of those reasons that it's like, hey, this is why we write about the game.
I'm glad I'm not. I'm glad I'm not the offensive coordinator this week. I'd take Matt Canada's paycheck. Don't get me wrong, but this is a difficult predicament for a guy that a lot of fans already think is not earning that paycheck.
I mean, and to your point, I'm not sure if I'd ever want to be the Steelers offensive coordinator, because it doesn't seem to matter who you are the problem, to a lot of fans and a lot of analysts. I'm like what are we doing here? Like, these guys are open. I had this thought watching Thursday Night Football, Brian, as Russell Wilson was just terrible and not doing the open man. And sure, I don't like Nathaniel Hackett as a coach so far. I think that he's bad. But on the last play of the game, they're in overtime. It's 4th down. Russell Wilson, if he throws a touchdown, they win it. If he doesn't, they lose it. And KJ Hamler breaks open off of a pick play, and he doesn't even look at him. And I'm just like, man, that's how I was feeling about Mitch Trubisky watching him on some of these plays. But to Mitch's credit, I don't think he was as bad as Russell's been. And he doesn't have the weapons. Well, I'll take that back. You could probably go back and forth about the weapons that both teams have.
Yeah, I'd probably take the Steelers' arsenal over the Broncos, especially with no Javonte Williams. But another part too, how about we give the Steelers receivers some credit where if they were frustrated with Trubisky,
they
didn't let that show very much, at least publicly. Like, you saw the quote from Penn State alum KJ Hamler, what he told a reporter in Denver, he could have walked into the end zone. Man, you don't want to hear that if you're the quarterback who didn't get him the ball.
I mean, I didn't even need to see the quote. Just his reaction after the play. He takes off his helmet. He's just slamming it into the ground. And I'm just like, man, if that was happening in Pittsburgh, we already had a debate of, is it Matt Canada? Is it Mitch Trubisky? Like, I was wondering, like, would that get people to see that was on the quarterback, or would people still be blaming the offensive coordinator? But that's the reason I think, like, I don't care how much. I'm not sure if I'd ever be a Steelers offensive coordinator, even if I was an offensive genius. I'd be like, you know what, y'all's crazy over there. Y'all think everything's on the play calls. But again, this is where it does come down to it. How do you set Kenny Pickett up at his first day? Because Kenny Pickett, he'll miss some reads, and he's a rookie, and he'll have a longer leash from Steelers fans, maybe not the Steelers coaches, but at least from people to say, "Hey, you're a rookie."
The coaches too. He's got to have a longer leash.
I agree. He needs to.
You're invested in this guy. You got to. Ray Fittipaldo did a great story for us last week that turned out to be prescient, to say the least, writing about the Jets taking Zach Wilson along pretty quickly and the Steelers bringing Pickett along a little bit more slowly. And Robert Saleh of the Jets said, you got to be willing to learn and grow with a young guy and appreciate being on the front end to develop him. Well, little did we know at the time that Ray wrote the story, Kenny Pickett was about to begin that week against Zach Wilson and company. So go back and check that one out on the website. If you didn't read it a week ago, there's really some salient points in there about kind of just, that natural maturation process and the ebbs and flows of riding with a rookie QB in the NFL.
Certainly, it's going to be a lot of ebbs and flows as the Steelers roll out Kenny Pickett. We'll see how that happens Sunday, but we're not done. We got to talk about the defense, and especially the secondary, because they are banged up. Questions about who might start in this game.
They got to do a lot to make life easier for Kenny Pickett. Not just the offense. The defense better help him out too, Christopher.
They have to. And, yes, because Kenny Pickett's going up against the number 2 defense, but the Steelers defense is also going up against the number 5 offense. That's how good this Bills team has been. We'll talk about that in the second segment here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our friends at Liquid Death. If you're out tailgating and you know someone's just crushing tall boys just seem endlessly and they're just throwing them back and you're sitting, wait a minute, how is that person still standing? He's drunk 10 of those things. It's not the actual beer. It's most likely a can of Liquid Death. What's Liquid Death? Well, Liquid Death is the new canned mountain spring water brand that is out here, and it's really refreshing. It tastes awesome. It's right out the can. You put it in the fridge. It's ice cold. And it's great for you, and it avoids that plastic taste. Now, why is it called Liquid Death? Well, Liquid Death says, hey, they're bringing death to plastic pollution in the world. All 10% of their proceeds on every can sold goes to fight plastic pollution, and also it's helping to murder your thirst. And it's that refreshing that when I crack it open, Brian here, it feels like a beer. It looks like a beer, but it tastes like refreshing water. That's ice cold. That's like out the Brita tap, fresh, and it's great. And again, it avoids any other, like, the weird taste when you get it out of a plastic bottle and you're like, man, is this really clean water, or is this just messed up bottled water? But that's why Liquid Death went with the can. It's better for the environment and it's better for you. Drinking Liquid Death, not only refreshing, but it comes without the plastic taste and eliminates any worry of that kind of residue being there. Go to Liquid Death.
Putting your mouth directly under a waterfall of a mountain, isn't it, Chris?
I've never done that. I'm not sure if I'll ever do that, because I'm like, listen, waterfalls be wild. I've been under a waterfall. That stuff's powerful, but imagine if it did taste fresh like that, it would taste like this. So go get yourself some Liquid Death at your local Target, 7-Eleven, or County Fair, or find a Liquid Death retailer near you with their store locator tool at liquiddeath.com/shore. That's liquiddeath.com/shore. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. Brian, we got to talk about this defense, because they haven't. And listen, we all know TJ Watt ain't been playing, and they've been on the field a lot. But this defense was built to make it so that the Steelers' offense didn't have to be even like decent to start the season. Like eventually, you were hoping that they'd get there, but this defense was built so that they could put the team on its back and win games, and it did that in Week 1. But it hasn't done that since. And you could say that it's done enough to do that since. Like, in the Patriots game, they held on as long as they could, and they kept them in the game, and they've really kept them in pretty much every game. It's just that the offense hasn't been good enough, but it's also the defense hasn't dominated enough. And now you face Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, and that Bills offense that's ready to light it up. They're the number 5 scoring offense going into this week. And there's a lot of questions about it. The secondary, which is a big part of this team. Minkah Fitzpatrick was, had a knee injury to start the week. Terrell Edmonds was in concussion protocol. Cam Sutton had a groin. Akella Witherspoon definitely looks like he's going to be out with a hamstring. Levi Wallace is banged up. Brian, what's the outlook for this secondary going into their Friday practice?
Yeah, the big one I'm not sure of is Terrell Edmonds, in concussion protocol. That's always tricky to call, but I do think that
unless you're the Dolphins.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's another topic for another day. But I will say, though, I think that that's maybe the guy they can most afford to lose back there, because obviously Minkah Fitzpatrick he's probably the Steelers MVP to this point in the season. And one of the people on this podcast picked him as the Steelers MVP in our preseason predictions. I kind of wish the season ended today.
Who's that person?
It's this guy wearing the Shaler hoodie. All right, go Titans Friday night against the North Hills Commanders. But so I think Minkah Fitzpatrick, you got to have him. Cam Sutton, even though he's playing hurt right now, I think got a couple picks this year. He's still making plays. Levi Wallace with Akella Witherspoon out, you got to have him on the outside, especially against his former team. If Terrell Edmonds can't go, it hurts you. But Trey Norwood is somebody they feel really good about. He's versatile. I didn't think he could be a quote unquote strong safety when they drafted him, but he's shown me a lot more physicality in this, first season and a quarter than I thought they were getting from him when he was just a 7th rounder out of Oklahoma. So there's a reason why they like him as a Swiss Army knife. I think he can hold it down and play every snap if he needs to. Maybe not quite as good as Edmonds, but I think he can get you through and maybe do some good things for you on the back end. But just a lot of moving parts right now. Does James Pierre get a snap? I thought you might see that last week. They really didn't do that. They rolled with Arthur Millette more. Yeah, they rolled him with Arthur Millette more, and the Jets kind of attacked him at times on the inside. So they're kind of searching for answers there on the back end. And to go back to your original point to open the segment, Chris, the role players haven't necessarily stepped up in the ways that I thought they would this season, but it's also been the stars. I mean, Cam Hayward, don't get me wrong. I mean, he's taken on, 2 blockers more than my wife is at home with our kids when I'm on the road in Buffalo this weekend. So those two can relate to each other. It's difficult, but he needs to step up and make more plays. He did that last year in Week 1 against Josh Allen in this Bills offense. But Alex Highsmith's a hard one to gauge, because you love the consistency. He's leading the league in sacks, but he's leaving some on the plate still, as we saw last week against the Jets. He couldn't bring Zach Wilson down 2 or 3 times. So everybody needs to do more. Malik Reed's been a disappointment. You saw more DeMarvin Leal. He did not make good on my prediction on last week's Friday show to get a sack. He did have a TFL. He looked good, but he couldn't quite get in the box score with the sack that I needed. But I think you'll see more of that. I think you'll see some changing of the guard a little bit when it comes to those inside linebackers. Maybe that 3 inside linebacker package didn't do quite what they hoped. They've got to throw some things out there against the Bills and see what sticks. Some more of that chaos that they found Week 1 against Joe Burrow and the Bengals. It's just a lot easier to wreak that havoc when you've got number 90 in there.
Shout out to Mrs. Batko for taking on the double team so that Brian Batko can be the linebacker that processes the field and gets.
I can rush the passer. In this case, it's a Kenny Pickett week, So, yes, shout out to her. I'll be on the road again this weekend in Buffalo. Another road trip that she will be. She'll be in zone coverage against the 2 little ones here at the Batco house.
That's good. That shout out to her.
Dawson Knox and Stephon Diggs.
Boy.
We do have a real Dawson here, but no Stephon. But
I was gonna ask, is there a Stephon Diggs?
No, our daughter's our 2-month-old daughter's name is not Stephon, but we do have an almost 3-year-old named Dawson. So a lot of parallels here. Yeah.
Oh, that's adorable. But Brian, I also got to get back to the point of this secondary. I mean, Mike Tomlin talked about them being above the neck group when he assembled them, because Minkah and Terrell, they're on the same page almost all the time. They play together long enough. You trust Cam Sutton. He came to the team as a smart guy. He's developed as that corner. You could throw in the slot. You could throw it in the boundary. You can let him float around the field as an extra safety at times if you really wanted to. And then Witherspoon and Wallace, two veteran cornerbacks who not great, but at least would be in position most of the time. And now with Witherspoon out, now you're throwing in Arthur Marlette a bit more than you wanted to. He's not just the run attacking slot corner that you can throw in. He has to pick coverage. And you saw, like you said, Zach Wilson picked at that. And that strength that the Steelers had, where not only were those guys in position, but you could see the trust from Terrell Austin when you watched the All-22. They were showing so many more disguised coverages in week 1. And then in the first part of week 2, they were. But then as you saw things, they kept being thrown out there more and more and more. Less of those disguises were happening. And I think that's impacted how well this coverage unit could be in crucial moments. The Steelers are one of the worst third down defenses in the NFL right now. And last week, they needed to be better than they were, better than 50% against the Jets. They needed to be able to make Zach Wilson's life a lot harder. He was finding the open men in a lot of crucial situations. A lot of it, I think, is because the secondary, they've been banged up. They've been on the field a lot. They need to be able to tighten it up. And if Minkah can go, I think that's a huge part of it. Without him, I think that secondary is going to fall apart. But I think Terrell Evans is also important. As good as Trey Norwood is, I've been a Trey Norwood guy since I saw him in his first training camp. I thought he was, like you said, he even got better in this training camp. He's more physical. He's putting his body out there. That's awesome. But they need this group to not just be decent, but be sharp and be the group that can kind of say, hey, whatever's going on up front, pass rush, run stop it, there's going to be complications. You're not just going to be able to look at us and say, cover 2 defense, I'm going here and it's going to be open. You have to be able to fake those things out. And I think the Steelers have gotten that at times this year. It just hasn't been consistent. And they're really going to need that against Josh Allen.
Yeah, and the way I look at it, I mean, you mentioned it. Week 1, I think Joe Burrow, he wasn't ready for it. He wasn't ready to read those coverages, and the Steelers took advantage of it. They put him in a world of hurt. Week 2, they get the deep shot to Nelson Aguilar put on their head with Ahkello Witherspoon. Just flat out bad ball skills on that one. And week 3, Amari Cooper gets a deep one on him where they kind of bid on a play action. So they're so keen on keeping a lid on it. We saw that all throughout training camp. There were very few big plays by the Steelers offense, even in that practice setting out in Latrobe, because of how much the defense was working on not allowing them to opposing offenses to take the top off. That happened week 2 and week 3. Perhaps that made them a little bit more conservative, a little softer against the Jets. And Zach Wilson, to his credit, made them pay, just, kind of dicing them up over the middle. So it brings you to, how exactly do you play Josh Allen now? Do you hope he misses some deep throws the way he did in that season opening upset?
He missed more than a couple now.
Right. Or do you, try to just keep, like I said, keep a lid on it and hope he doesn't, that bend but don't break mentality. Man, I said I wouldn't want to be Matt Canada this week. I guess I also wouldn't want to be Terrell Austin this week. So I'm happy in my comfy chair on the back deck right now, just talking about this instead of having to coach it.
The Bills will do that to a lot of coaches. Oh, man, I'm glad I'm not. Well, I wish I wasn't working this week. This is a tough one, but they have to have a game plan. We'll see what the game plan is. We'll also see what happens with the Friday injury report for the Pittsburgh Steelers, giving us a better sense of who will and won't play in this big game. Coming up, we got our predictions, our turning points, our biggest factors to the game. All of that right here on the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Yinzers in the Berg. Yinzers in the Berg is the ultimate Pittsburgh sports apparel shop that you need to get to so that you're getting everything Steelers, Pirates, Penguins, Pitt, anything Pittsburgh sports they have. And with the Steelers campaign off and running, it's time to show your support for your black and gold. It's easy. They've got 2 legendary shops in the strip district that you can go to all week long, plus a growing online store. With Yinzers in the Berg, they're the place to go for Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more. And hey, if you're a big Kenny Pickett fan, they got a lot of Kenny Pickett merchandise. Head to Yinzers in the Berg or shop online at Yinzers Yinzers, PGH.com. That's Yinzers, PGH.com for all your Pittsburgh sports apparel. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. It's time to look at this matchup now. The infamous 14-point underdog stat is the truth for the Steelers. They are 14-point underdogs, according to, I think it was Adam Schefter who said it's the first time since the NFL merger that they've been a 14-point underdog, and they were the last NFL team to not have that on their record.
Yeah, I knew it was the highest spread for the Steelers for as long as Pro Football Reference has kept track of that, and that's a pretty long time. So it's funny, like right Sunday night, I always tweet out, the opening line for the Steelers game because one of those million betting websites emails it to me, and I tweeted out the Steelers are 13-point dogs against the Bills, and that's not a typo. And of course, a bunch of people are like, "Why would that be a typo? Have you seen them play?" I'm like, "Have you ever seen a Steelers spread that big?" So now I feel a little bit vindicated that no, we literally haven't. So it's well deserved. Don't get me wrong, but it is strange to see, and it probably speaks a lot too to just the betting public a lot over the years from decade to decade have believed in the mystique of the Steelers. And, that mystique doesn't block Von Miller, and it doesn't defend Stephon Diggs, and it doesn't try to tackle Josh Allen.
It's a lot to put together against this team. And I think that's the whole thing is that like last year when they upset the Bills were, a favorite to do well that year. But this year, it's like they've added more ammunition onto that team. You've seen them blow out the Super Bowl champion Rams. You see them overcome games where they had some rough moments like they did against the Ravens last week. So, and they're more into the season. We've like for example, we saw the Steelers catch the Bills off guard last year, just like they caught the Bengals off guard in Week 1. Once teams get going, especially really talented teams, they start to put things together, and it becomes harder to beat them. But who knows? The
Steelers saw that the last time they were this big of not this big, but their largest spread in recent memory until this was the wild card game last year against the Chiefs. And that one went according to plan for Vegas and then some.
Yeah, it indeed it did.
Got away from
But Brian, we got to talk about, before we get to our predictions, what's the biggest key, the biggest factor the Steelers have to lock in this week if they're going to stand a chance against these Bills?
Yeah, of course you're tempted to say you got to play well for Kenny Pickett, and you do, but I honestly do think they're going to come out with a fairly conservative plan for him. Whether that's right or wrong, I kind of said earlier that I would maybe lean the other way, but hey, that's what I think they should do, not necessarily what I think they will do. However, in my Acrisure Fan Advantage scouting report for Week 5 that'll be on the Post-Gazette website this weekend, I said you can't let it be the Josh Allen show. You've got to figure out a way to at least slow him down. You're probably not going to be able to stop him, but that was a key to beating them Week 1 a year ago. Cam Hayward bats a pass at the line that forces them to go 3 and out early on. It gave the Steelers a little bit of momentum in Buffalo, the same way they kind of set the tone against the Bengals with Minka's pick 6 in Week 1 this year. So you've got to find ways to get to him. Hope he'll make a mistake. Hope he'll try to go for a big play, and maybe he turns it over and gives you some life. So that to me is the ultimate key. It always is when you try to face this Bills outfit, because he might be the best football player on the planet right now. So that's kind of what I am looking at in this matchup. But obviously, it's easier said than done trying to slow him down.
It is easier said than done. I mean, Josh Allen, he has a cannon arm, and like early on in his career, I was like, man, that guy doesn't see the field. He's just kind of taking what's there. But each year he got sharper and quicker and smarter. And now I'm like
the guy who gets out of the pocket and scrambles and makes you try to bring him down, which, who on the Steelers defense do you feel good about bringing him down, especially in the secondary? So, just so many arrows in his quiver.
And arrows in his quiver. Look at you. That's how you know this man's a writer, ladies and gentlemen. But in all seriousness, talking about it, is the thing is that he still does the sandbox football stuff, but he's processing at such a higher level, and that's why he's such a good quarterback and he's an MVP candidate. But I'm with you. That's a big key. One of my biggest keys, though, is time of possession. The Steelers have the second worst time of possession numbers and the second shortest drives, average drive per season or per per drive this season. And it's been a big part of it's been the problem they've had on offense staying on the field. They're in the bottom half of the league in third downs with 37. I think they're 37 or 36% on third downs. And with Kenny Pickett, they were 5 of 6 last week. And I'm not saying this is all about Kenny Pickett, but Matt Canada, this offense, they need to come together to stay on the field. Because here's the thing, Brian, the Steelers defense could do exactly what you're saying to do, because they did that against the Chiefs last year. They kept Patrick Mahomes off the board for a quarter and a half. Heck, they got on the board and gave the Steelers a lead. But what happened? The Steelers offense put them back out there, and by the 5th or 6th drive, the Steelers defense is like, we've thrown all the things we can at this guy right now. And
I've got nothing left.
Exactly. That's what it is. If you got arrows in your quiver, you ran out of arrows. And I think that's the whole situation that the Steelers have to avoid. And how to avoid that? The offense has to possess the football. It doesn't mean putting up mega numbers. It doesn't mean, Kenny Pickett making amazing plays all the time. It's just find ways to win on third downs. They've been mediocre at it, under Mitch Trubisky. They were really good at third downs last week. If they win those more this week, I think that plays a major factor. And if the Steelers defense is able, because it's not a guarantee that they're going to be able to do what we're saying that they need to do on the defensive part. I just think that even if they somehow pull that off without TJ Watt, with a banged up secondary, if they somehow pull it off, it won't matter if the offense isn't protecting them on their side.
Yeah, you pretty much took the words out of my mouth for my prediction that I'm going to make for this game in a lot of ways. I do have some confidence that this offense is going to sustain drives a little bit more, be a little bit more fluid with Kenny Pickett at the helm. I think he'll extend some plays. He will use his legs to convert, move the chains here and there. He'll hit some back shoulder throws that maybe Mitch Trubisky either wasn't confident in taking or can't make. And that'll allow them to shorten the game to a degree. However, I also think Pickett's going to have his fair share of struggles in this one, going up there in a raucous environment against a really good defense that has playmakers at every level. So I'm going to go Bills 23, Steelers 13. The Steelers cover, but they just don't. I don't think they have enough firepower in this one. However, here is a sliver. I said however twice in that little spiel.
You did.
But here is a sliver of hope if you're a Steelers fan listening. I am 0 for 4 so far this season. My record is worse than the Steelers. So if there were ever a week for them to shock the world and pick off the Bills, maybe this is it, simply by virtue of fading Batco.
By fading Batco.
I'm not proud of it, but I'll absorb this negativity and smile in the face of adversity as I go out there and try to make a prediction for the 5th week in a row after being wrong the first 4.
Someone help this man. Mike Tomlin has taken over his brain, and he's saying the Tomlinism's just of his own will and volition.
That's what happens when you pick the Bengals to win week 1. You pick the Steelers to beat the Patriots at home. You pick the Steelers, or you pick the Steelers to win at Cleveland, and you pick the Steelers to beat the Jets. So
listen, my record's 1-3, so I'm not exactly doing that much better either myself. I'm with the Pittsburgh Steelers though, but I'm with you. I think there's a bit more points thrown up in this game because I do think Josh Allen and Kenny Pickett do some really cool things, and I think that's where you'll find fans, like, it was funny to listen to fans and people in this city talk about, it didn't feel like a loss because Kenny Pickett played, and it's just like, yeah, but they're still 1-3. I think it's going to be similar vibes off of that. You're going to see more efficient Steelers offense, but like you said, ebbs and flows to rookie quarterback play. That's going to come with ups and downs. It's going to come with, he's going to throw interceptions that you're like, you need to not do that one, Kenny. But then he's also going to make plays. It's just like, whoa, look at that. That's the future right there. It's the Bills went through the same thing with Josh Allen. Not that Kenny Pickett is Josh Allen, but when you have a talented young quarterback that you think is your future, you have to let them be able to go out there, make it's like Miss Frizzle, get messy, make mistakes. I just made a Magic School Bus reference on the No Show Drive podcast.
I'm picking up what you're putting down, Chris.
Thank you. But I think that's what the Steelers have to go through, and Steelers fans have to understand that's going to be part of this process. So all that being said, I got the score a little bit higher, but the same margin there, 31-21. I think that the Steelers defense keeps the Bills in check until halftime. And then in the third quarter, they crack the code and they start putting up the points. And I think that you do see Kenny Pickett lead some touchdown drives, and maybe they get a defensive turnover that gets them a short field for another one. But I think by and large, this is too talented a Bills team for the Steelers to they would need. There's a very slim path to victory in this one. And I said the same thing about that Chiefs playoff game last year. They had a slim path to victory. It starts with great defense, holding things down, making life hard for the quarterback, and then it continues by the offense keeping that defense off the field. If Josh Allen's fifth drive doesn't come until late second quarter, that'll be a great pace for the Steelers. I think that would be awesome. Problem is, that ain't happened too often lately. So we'll see how that plays out. Both Brian and I have the Steelers as we're picking them as 10-point dogs. So we're picking them to at least cover in this situation.
I think a lot of people out there think this could challenge for the most lopsided loss for the Steelers under Mike Tomlin, which, if you're scoring at home, is 31 points, I believe, done twice. Once last year at Cincinnati, and a Philadelphia Eagles loss. I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, whenever that was. 30.
Well, that was 2016, right? That was 6 years ago, because that was Carson Wentz's rookie year.
That's
Trust
right.
me.
Yes,
I have too many Eagles.
I'm not as old as I thought, I guess.
I was gonna say it's not that. See, for me, I just remember because I have too many friends who are Eagles fans that just talk relentless nonsense. But hey,
Tyler Batiste, yeah,
Johnny McGonigal. Shout out to our guys. But anyways, that's the North Shore Drive podcast. All our previews, all our predictions, everything right here. Check out this show Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Brian, what you got cooking for the people to check you out this weekend at the Post-Gazette?
Yeah, kind of a story that for me is surreal to write. Kenny Pickett trying to take this town by storm. He sort of did it. Yeah, and speaking of that, Ray Fittipaldo has another piece on Pickett trying to take his debut by storm, considering Ben Roethlisberger, not debut, his first NFL start, considering that's what Ben Roethlisberger was up against when he made his first NFL start way back in 2004. Ray caught up with Mark Whipple, who, of course, was with Ben for that season, and he was with Kenny for his last season at Pitt. So check out Ray's and check out mine, which is more big picture, kind of cinematic look at the Kenny Pickett journey, one that I documented in its infancy when I was covering Pitt, and one that, we've circled back to each other now on the other side of the building on the south side. So I think it's a pretty cool story. Definitely check that one out.
I'm sure everyone in the world is pointing out how Kenny Pickett beat the undefeated number 2 Miami Hurricanes in his first start for Pitt, and how it's such a parallel to the Buffalo Bills. But hey, he's been a heck of a player. He's been a heck of a guy. That's why he was the Steelers' first round pick for how much he developed at Pitt. We'll see how he does in his first start. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. Check us out at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Check the North Shore Drive podcast out on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you saw it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette to get all of our sports segments. We'll be talking more about this after the game. After the game, come here to see Paul Zeiss and Adam Bittner breaking down, getting their reactions. Monday, I'll be back with Ray Fittipaldo. But every day, Monday through Friday, this channel has got great content. So stay tuned. We've got a lot of great stuff coming your way right here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.